Bishops. We would like to begin today's meeting with a land acknowledgement. Bishops University is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki people. I invite you to take a moment to think of why you are here today as an educator or future educator, and how that might relate to our shared history on this land where we are meeting today, albeit digitally, but the same. Many of us are nearby. That brings me to today's presentation. Today's guest speaker is Joanna Rowe, who will introduce us to an adaptation of Niemiec's Aware, Explore, Apply model, which we can use when teaching literature in the classroom. The presentation should last around 20 to 25 minutes. During the presentation, please write your questions in the chat. And then after the presentation, we will do live questions. We ask that everyone keep their mics off during the presentation. Today's meeting will be recorded, and if anyone is uncomfortable with recording, you may close your camera, although we love to see faces for people who don't mind. The recording is for the website so that it can be used as a resource. The For Real project aims to generate new ideas in thinking, doing, and being as teachers. The idea is to create resources for educators and teachers. All of this will be done through the website. It can be found simply by typing in For Real into Google, and I will also add the link into the chat in a few minutes. Now I will take a quick opportunity to introduce you to our speaker today. Joanna is a Canadian citizen who studied modern and medieval languages at Gonville and Caius College in Cambridge, UK. She lived for 25 years in Hamburg, Germany, where she was senior lecturer in English language at Fresenius University. I may have mispronounced that. Since 2019, she has been back here in Canada. Currently, she lives and works in Kuujjuaq, where she is the education consultant for the Nunavik School Board, Kativik, Ilisarniliriniq. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Joanna. I will hand it off to you now.
Thank you, Lindsay, and great pronunciation of Inuktitut. Super. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you to you all for taking the time to join me, and thank you to Sunny for asking me to bring this webinar to you. Lovely to meet you. And as Lindsay said, I'm the education consultant for English language and social studies for secondary students here at KI, Kativik, Ilisarniliriniq, and which means in Inuktitut, a good place to learn. So that's the way to say school board here in Inuktitut. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about building a strong sense of self through owning the words that you use when you learn language. In this case, perhaps not your own, not your first language, making a new language your own. And I'm going to show you how you could adapt the model Aware, Explore, Apply, which is actually from the world of coaching. And I've used it in the classroom with quite a few different student groups, and maybe it's something that is scalable and useful for you and your interactions with your students. Or perhaps if you're doing other work with students or clients in your care. Okay. Lindsay, perhaps you could just go to the first slide. I'm just very briefly going to say something about my background and motivation as a teacher. Not background as in career background, but my motivation as a teacher, only to enable you hopefully to understand why I make the connection between building a sense of self and learning language. My starting question is always, what is it that we wish for our young people in the collective? And I've put a brief list. I'm not going to go through all the points on my slide. I'm going to emphasize sense of self as being top of my list. I really wish for all the young people who graduate at Kativik to go out with a good sense of self. And yes, I want them to perceive chances in their life, and I want them to have the power to make good choices and to have resilience to embrace ambivalence, which is in fact a definition, it's a tautology for me, it's actually resilience. But sense of self is really where I'm going with this. And the key to all the points that I've put on the slide is double colon. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Literacy. And I'm just going to set out very briefly my terms of reference of what I think literacy is, which is basically the power to do your life. Do your life is not idiomatic English. I've taken it from my daughter Jasmine, who is German speaking, and she gave this to me, gifted this to me, translated directly from German, do your life. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely wonderful as an inner attitude to what it is that you do when you go out of the front door. You would navigate all the interactions that make up the contents of your life. The power to do your life is literacy. In my case, I'm teaching English. I'm consulting non-Inuit teachers in the way that they can empower students to use English and to love English. And literacy is equity, in the sense that I think it's important to welcome multiple cultural identities within the one person. And I think in our globalized modern world, most of us do have multiple cultural identities, maybe not in the spectrum of languages that we know how to use, but we do live more than one cultural identity in our lives and in our expression of ourselves. Critical thinking is required. Learning about language. How do I do things? What's the appropriate way to be effective in a certain interaction? And at the bottom of it really is self-efficacy as the root of empowerment. And without self-efficacy, a human being simply can't operate. And in education, a student cannot succeed. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Lots that I could say about that, but that's really just to give you an idea of my values. And Lindsay, if we could go to the next stage, I'm actually just going to jump straight into talking more about the model and the outline of activities that I'm offering you today. And so I've called it strength identifying. Strength identifying character strengths. And the model itself, in fact, is called Aware, Explore, Apply, AEA. And I'm going to, in the webinar, I'm going to show you what I've done in the classroom and what might be useful for you. You can adapt it and hopefully scale it up or down for the student groups that you are encountering in your daily work. The picture, in case you're wondering, is my dad and my niece, who's Chinese. And the idea that in English, we open a book from left to right. And of course, very logically for my niece, it's right to left. So we can experience that by explicitly teaching these things, not assuming. And in the student group that I interact with, a child of that age may not necessarily know what to do with a book, because books are very new in the Inuktitut speaking Inuit culture. So these things we can't assume. No? We have to give, and we can do that. We know how to do that as teachers. Okay, next slide, Lindsay, please. So I'm just going to give you some signposting, our journey together today, our trail today. I'm just going to say very briefly something about my specific situation in Kativik in Nunavik. And then I'm going to jump right into what the model is, AEA, Aware, Explore, Apply. And I'm going to give you some background to the model, what the model is based on, to do with strengths, character strengths. And then I'm going to outline my classroom activity, phases of the model. I did have a lesson plan ready, but I decided it was going to take a long time and it might distract from what I wanted to convey this afternoon. But if you would like, then please let me know at the end and I can send it out. And then I'm going to go through the 3 stages of the model: aware, which is going to be a brainstorming activity, an offering for the students; explore, as an activity for the classroom that's going to hopefully be quite playful, but be the basis of a process; and the apply part, inclusion of others' perspectives, some activities, developmental activities that could be the basis of an assessment if you were going to speak to the curriculum using what you've done at a second step or several subsequent steps. Okay, and then I'm going to open the floor for your reflections and on what I've brought today, and give you time to give feedback. I'm very excited to hear responses about what I've tried to do. Okay, Lindsay, let's jump straight in. I've just given you a few impressions in pictures of what it's like in Kuujjuaq. And this is the village with the Koksuk River behind the houses in the snow. And on the left is one of our compassionate schools directors here at Kativik, Ilisarniliriniq, and in the middle are some students. And my specific situation here in Nunavik is quite a complex educational setting, and I could probably talk for half an hour about the reason why it's so complex. But if you consider that most people here in Nunavik are of Inuit heritage and have a first language Inuktitut, so I suppose we would categorize them as EAL stroke D, so emergent speakers of English. And on the other hand, I am consulting a teaching staff that the vast majority of whom are not very familiar with the Inuit culture, Inuktitut language. They're non-Inuit settler Canadians, both Francophone and Anglophone. Obviously, English is my interaction is mostly with Anglophone staff. So perhaps that's enough to say to portray the complexity of the educational setting that we're in. Okay. A lot more I could say about that, but we'll move on to the model and the outline of activities. I'm just going to give you some very brief background to Ryan Niemiec, who's actually from the world of coaching and from the branch of psychology that we call positive psychology, which used to be one of my research areas before I left Hamburg in Germany. And Ryan's very preoccupied with character strengths. So if you're interested in finding out more about his work, his institute is called VIA, which stands for Values in Action. And if you like, you can take the free survey, which is great fun. And there is also an adapted survey for youth, if that becomes relevant. I have asked students to do that, and we've discussed the results, and that was a project all by itself. So if you're interested, then go ahead. There's the link, viacharacter.org, and survey's free, and it's considered scientifically very sound. And on the next slide, I'm actually going to show you the 24 character strengths that are the basis of these outline of activities in the classroom and the basis of the model aware, explore, apply. I'm just going to stop talking for a minute or two and just let you read. The strengths are actually clustered into 6 categories called virtues. We're not going to touch upon that just now. So I'm just going to let you admire, so to say, the 24 character strengths. Okay, the students would obviously have a lot more time to familiarize themselves with those concepts. Lindsay, if we could just move on for a minute. We might come back to this slide in just a second, but I just want to go on a little bit and explain what the outline of activities is going to look like. In the aware phase, we're going to do a brainstorming activity using what you've just seen. And in the explore phase, we're going to develop that into what I call target practice. I'll show you what I mean by that when we get to it. And in the apply phase, I'm going to ask them to do some expressive writing for 15 minutes, which is not going to be an assessment at all. That's going to be a private piece of writing for each student. Okay. And this model I'm using to offer a non-language goal. And on the basis of that non-language goal, I'm going to introduce some developmental activities that could be the basis of assessment. So perhaps more structured activities that speak to curriculum. In the case of Kativik, Ilisarniliriniq, doesn't always work for me either. In the case of our school board, we have 3 competencies. And so each lesson, of course, the aim would be to give an array of activities that reflect and speak to those 3 competencies. So I envision these activities as activities that are scalable. As I say, I have used them with many different kinds of student groups. And I'm thinking that they would be meaningful for learners in Sec 2, grade 8, Sec 2 Quebec system, yeah, roughly grade 8, and above. So secondary students. I'm interested to hear later on whether you agree or whether you think that they could, that the activity could be adapted for even younger students. That would be interesting for me to know. Okay, Lindsay, next slide, please. So I say strength identifying and words that name values, exploring vocabulary about strengths and how we use them in our lives. You'll notice that I've equated the word strength with a value, and I could say a lot about that too. I've done it consciously because I'm asking the students to equate the strength as the means to express values that are important to them, as the carriers of values, and the idea that strengths have a lot to do with goals in the sense of alignment with values. Okay, I might have to come back to that at the end if you have questions. Very happy to talk about that. Okay, so as I said, a non-language based goal, and I'm going to make that more concrete for the students by giving them 2 questions. What do you want to be in the world? It's a big question, isn't it? And what do you want to do in the world? And then I'm going to ask them in a second step to think about a statement. It's actually a very typical NLP statement. Those people who are interested in NLP, you're more likely to reach your goals if your goals are aligned with your values. Okay. So we're not there yet. Sunny says the PowerPoint has disappeared. No, I can still see the PowerPoint, Sunny.
Okay, then it's just me, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just you, unfortunately, Sunny. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to embellish it so that it's obvious where we are. Okay. Next slide, please, Lindsay. So just going back to that idea of sense of self as being so important to me, that I want the students to take every chance in developing that. I'm going to use the AEA model, Aware, Explore, Apply model, to and integrate some strategies so that the students become more aware of their personal strengths. And yes, it's a language lesson, but okay, this is the context in which I'm embedding some language and hoping that they're going to own those words and use them again in different contexts. So a summary of what we ask students or clients in the Aware, Explore, Apply model would be to get in touch with strengths at the core of who you are. That's the aware part. To make connections between character strengths and successes, relationships, achievements, goals, and challenges ahead. That would be the explore part. And then comes the doing phase, the actual application of those thoughts and ideas, and thinking about strengths that you can use to get closer to your goals. And now I'm going to show you what that looks like in class. You can have the next slide, please, Lindsay. Sunny says she can see it again now. Is that right, Sunny? You can see? Yeah, she's nodding. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, we might have to go back to 8, Lindsay, if that's possible. Could we go back to slide 8, which is the table with the 24 strengths? That would be marvelous, so that people have that in it. Yeah, wonderful. So what I have done in class is I've had the table with the, I'm going to call them tiles, tiles as in, yeah, tiles where flashcards, I suppose we'd call them, wouldn't we? Show cards, as a poster, very large on the wall, with the character strengths on them. And then I'm going to have movable tiles, postcard size, each with a character strength on them, in a number that students can pick them up and put them down again and look at them, and several of each probably. And I usually put in some blank tiles, some jokers, because I've had students who say, well, none of those character strengths are things that I can really relate to. And so I've asked them to write their own. And students can move around this gallery of character strengths. I'm going to call it a gallery. And their goal is to just to discuss with each other the values connected to the strength. So what good is the strength? Humility, what is it good for? If I'm a good leader, what's it good for? What's good about being a good leader? And I'm going to, as a teacher, I'm going to move around with them and help them to understand some words. I'm going to explain some things where necessary, and I might even play too. Okay, and the goal of the exercise brainstorming is that each student should choose 5 tiles, 5 signature strengths. So signature is how we know it's you. So this is just very intuitively thinking about yourself, or perhaps having your friends tell you, you've got a good sense of humor. Okay, so I'll pick humor. It doesn't matter. Okay, no right and wrong. And that's what I'm asking them to do, is to come out of the walking around the gallery with 5 character strengths. Okay, super. Lindsay, could we move forward to number 13, please? one more, please. Cool. Thank you so much. And I've used this with many different groups, but today I wanted to add an experiment, which I hope that you'll comment on and give me your perspective of whether you think it will work. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you a similar table, well, not a similar table, a different table, you'll see very different table with some Inuktitut strengths. So some character strengths that are not a direct translation of what I've just shown you, those 24, but now this time they're character strengths that are derived from Inuit culture. And I'm going to ask the students, maybe after recess or after a little break, to come and leverage their own cultural knowledge by repeating the aware phase with the tiles labeled with the values on the next page, or the values that they might want to contribute. It might be different. So at this point, I want to put myself very clearly in the position of co-learner. They're going to be telling me. Okay, so this is also a very good excuse to get them to talk, which is sometimes quite a challenge with this particular student group that I interact with. Okay, next slide, Lindsay. Let's take a deep breath and look at the very long words in Inuktitut for character strengths. And I'm going to stop talking and just let you have a look. Wow, no? Those are some words. And what I like about it is that it's sorted in a different way. If you like, I can give you the quadrants. I can tell you what why it's clustered. And, you know, we had 6 clusters of virtues. My Inuktitut speaking Inuit colleagues have told me that the upper left quadrant, discipline, learning, having the right attitude, those ones, the 7 ones top left, refer to a cluster that has to do with heritage, culture, history, so respect for tradition, learning, and also in that top left for Inuit people comes environmental science. So the respect for the environment, but actually moving in space on the land. All of those values have to do with that, which is very interesting for me. And the top right, heavy thinking, curiosity, experimentation. That cluster has to do with analytical, mathematical thinking, strategic thinking, perhaps a bit more abstract. The moving to the bottom left, the building relationships, respecting others. This for Inuit culture has a lot to do with the creativity and artistic expression, the individuality and the reflective, deep hermit style of thinking about yourself, seeking to understand, thinking about a problem. And the last quadrant, those 4, harmony, responsibility, discipline, wisdom, are actually for the Inuit to do with survival, very existential values to do with well-being and coming through, also finding one's place in society. So very interesting for me to hear how the character strengths have been clustered and sorted, perhaps not directly relevant to the AEA model today, but still very interesting. So I thought that I would add that to perhaps an outline of activities for my particular specific situation, and maybe it's something to think about for you if you have multiple cultural identities. That might be an invitation to motivate students to feel included and to contribute perhaps a bit more. Okay, next slide, Lindsay, please. And this is the explore phase. So This is the activity where, with their 5 tiles that the students have collected, it doesn't matter, we can do both at the same time, English language and Inuktitut language, why not? Very interesting. Or we might do separately. That might be something to try out. In any case, this is my target practice. So it's my target, divided into 4 quadrants, which I've labeled with words that I think will suit my students. If it was a different student group, I might think again. I've got school and work, fun, people, which I guess stands for relationships, and the bottom left, personal growth, as whatever they see as personal growth, health, and I probably should have added well-being to the bottom, because I think that's a word that a lot of people can relate to at the moment. That seems to be very en vogue. Okay, so what I'm going to ask the students to do, I hope will be apparent on the next page, next slide, I should say. Lindsay, if you could, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I was going to, I'm very sorry, next time, I created a drag and drop situation where you could have all had a link and done your own little target practice with your own tiles. Unfortunately, I couldn't get PowerPoint to accept my interactive module or whatever in it, but maybe next time I solve the problem. Of course, this is a situation that is much better in person, and we can move around and we can talk to each other, and we can, you know, hopefully have some fun with it. But I'm going to invite the students to take their 5 tiles and to literally fire them, put them in the target. I think I'm going to say to them strengths that they use very intensively, they might put nearer the bullseye, and strengths that they either don't use very often, or strengths that they would like to use more, would possibly go further towards the outside. They might say, well, I use the same strength in 2 quadrants. Well, okay, we can duplicate that. We can do that. That's an opportunity to have a conversation about that. But basically, I'm asking them to do something that's a bit playful and not worry about it, and to do it very intuitively. And obviously, this is an exploratory activity. This is nothing to do with being measured on by what you say or what you do. Okay, next slide, Lindsay, please. Okay, and would possibly look like that if with Inuit strengths, or possibly not. It might be completely different. I have no idea, and it would be interesting. It's always very interesting to look at the target afterwards and reflect, you know, where people have put their strengths and how many people have put a certain strength in a certain place, and things like that. These are all golden opportunities to exchange language and to get people to reflect and hopefully get enthusiastic about what we're going to do next. Okay, Lindsay, yes, we can go to the next. I've just noticed the time. So in the thinking about what you could do with the model as developmental activities, we had a talk phase, or several talk phases in the first 2 phases. So in AWARE, comparing, matching English language values with Inuit values, that would be very interesting, having an exchange of thoughts about this. If students don't want to discuss, which in my particular situation, that is something that is often the case, that it's not, discussing is perhaps not something that is a cultural norm amongst Inuktitut speakers. So I might have something that's very much more structured. And one thing that I have tried with learners who are perhaps lower level and haven't got quite as much language is to have an interview with yourself. So to get people to go in pairs, and to have Sunny and Joanna working as a pair, where Sunny interviews Joanna and Joanna stars Sunny. So she plays Sunny. And perhaps with some structured, scaffolded questions to make it nice and easy, and perhaps a structured template, how people could record the answers and how we could use those answers to do some to do some reading and writing afterwards. Okay, reading is perhaps a little more difficult to think what could we do with that, but I think using definitions from the word wall, we could certainly do some reading connected with that. Or even better would be if we at some point go back to characters in a novel or a story that students know and talk about the words that we've learned and thought about with ourselves, and hopefully the students are able to read more and understand more deeply adjectives and strengths, if that's appropriate when we go back to the things that we've been reading at a different time. And in the writing part, the competency 3, which is writes text, I'm going to first ask them to do some expressive writing, some free writing, no assessment, write a letter to yourself. Okay, and that could be the basis for a writing project that's more formal. Okay, but we're not there yet. We're still in the apply phase. Lindsay, next slide, please. Okay, and here I've summarized a little bit more some reflection questions that you could perhaps use as a bridging scaffold in the interview if you choose that activity, or you could use it in a different for a different activity. So in the aware phase, we're thinking of the target activity. Which strengths did you use a lot? So we might have taken pictures of the target practice with all the tiles on, where we can see that, you know, several people have put creativity in the fun quadrant, for example. Okay, so we could think about what are the strengths that you use a lot, and thinking about the target practice, maybe building on that. Maybe a reflection question could be, okay, so what's the best achievement so far? What's something in the recent past that you're proud of that worked? How did you do it? Which strengths did you use? And maybe we can set up some dialogue around that kind of reflection. And in the apply, okay, so can you use your strengths in different ways? Is there something out there that you'd like to do? And maybe visualizing, planning almost, what kind of strengths will be good for that? And having a talk around that, which we can again spin out and build on it, let it run, and build it up to some writing activity. Okay, super. Next slide, please, Lindsay. Okay, so to tell you a little bit more about what expressive writing is, because I'm not quite sure if that's common knowledge. Expressive writing, again, comes from the world of positive psychology, where you literally write for 15 minutes without any inhibition. So you write, you know, what first comes to mind, and it's absolutely private. Teacher's not going to look at it, and it's post. It's write a letter to yourself, imagining that you've just received your high school diploma. In this case, my secondary students, but perhaps it could, in a different context, could be something else. And you've made good use of all the possibilities that presented themselves during your school career, or actually I should have put chances there rather than possibilities. How did you do it? What personal strengths did you use? And put on the shoes of your future self and write a letter. And 15 minutes continued expressive writing, and to let go. Okay, because I'm not going to look at it as a teacher, and it's just for you. And maybe at a later stage we can go back to that as the basis for some more structured writing. So an apply phase, thinking, projecting forwards, thinking about character strengths, signature strengths. Okay, Lindsay, next slide, please. Okay, so as I say, we can go back to the questions, the non-language goal, and do some more structured writing around the questions and the statements. So what do you want to be in this world? What do you want to do in this world? And the idea that you're more likely to reach your goals if your goals are aligned with your values. In other words, if you're using your strengths, then the goals that you've chosen, okay, if they're aligned with those strengths, then you're probably going to be successful. Okay, last slide, Lindsay. Okay. So I've tried to do two things with this. I've called it lesson plan, but we'll say outline of activities, that lesson plan. I'm happy to send you if you would like to have that. So I've tried to empower students to own the words that they choose to use. So they chose the tiles and they use them in interaction with other students, largely with other students, and in their intra-conversation with themselves. And I've experimented with offering, in this case, Inuit students a space to leverage their own knowledge of themselves and their culture. And I've presented myself, the teacher, as a co-learner and somebody who is regularly confronted with using the strengths that I have in the best possible way to be the best version of myself in life and in teaching. And my question to you is whether you think that students will be able to take that offer. And I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. And thank you so much for listening and for allowing me this opportunity to share with you some things that have worked in the classroom and some new ideas. For me, new ideas. Thank you very much.
Okay, so normally at this point we have some question, answer, and discussion. We're a pretty small group. I don't know if we really need to raise our hands. I don't know. We're feeling flexible here, relaxed, but we could if you want.
I'll just jump in because I know there's not much time. I really enjoyed your talk, Joanna. Thank you so much, and it is so inspiring. And I think all my students will need to hear it, because for them, a lot of times language is language, and then doing your life is doing your life. But language, I think you give us a very good example of why we learn a language and how language can be a way to bridge two cultures, and also being able to make choices in your life and be empathetic towards people around you, and as you said, I think you said it so beautifully, be self-sufficient and have this strong sense of self. And when I was looking at the Ryan Niemiec's how many categories? Six
categories, yes.
6 categories. And my question was exactly, what about the other culture? Do they share the same? And I'm glad that you brought this up, and I think the Inuit, it's the Inuit students who come up with those terms. It was beautiful.
It would be very interesting to know. I'd love to really do that. I really want to do this with a teacher here, or a few teachers maybe in Nunavik, to really find out, what do the Inuit students do with that? Because when I chose those values, I consulted with a Inuktitut speaking colleague who is Inuit, and she pointed out to me that those values come from a philosophy of knowledge called IQ, and I'm going to try and pronounce it because I've been practicing, so it's my opportunity. The I stands for Inuit, and the Q stands for Hauhima Hatukangit. Okay, Hauhima is your mind, and Yatukangit is the how do I know what I know? It's
wow.
So this is something that is I'm learning very much for Inuit people. What an Inuktitut speaking person understands by the words "I know" is much different from I'm going to say Western. I know it's not really quite the right word, but what a Westerner would understand by knowledge. We can say I've read that in a book, or I've read this article, I've read this paper. So now I know, now I've learned. But this is not the way the Inuit see it. The true knowledge is only what you have experientially learned yourself. So your own lived experience is the basis of knowledge. And so those values and the way they're clustered are based upon that philosophy of knowledge. So it is very different. And so it would be very, very interesting to see, whether Inuit students could do something with that idea, and whether they'd be able to perhaps reflect on that. That would be super fascinating. I'm sure I'm going to try it out.
Yeah. I just want one more comment, and I think it can be used with any ESL classroom with diverse learners. Like, for example, when I first saw the category, and I think from Chinese, humility is very important.
Yes.
Which is very different from Western culture also. So I think by allowing students to share the cultural values, and then how they see themselves in both cultures, is also, I can see a lot of potential in this project.
And yes, I've had a lot of I just one sentence said the classes with whom it really resonated for me was in Germany when I was teaching as a volunteer Syrian refugees, and the Syrian culture is another culture where you reflect a lot on values, inherent values, and so on, and that they really did respond to the model really well. Monica, I'm sorry, you wanted to say something. You had your hand up.
Not at all. I'm happy to wait my turn, but I did have a question I was curious about with respect to the writing piece, the C3, and the expressive writing aspect of coming out of positive psychology. I'm always thinking about differentiation and those students that are more or less at ease with writing, because I think the notion, even if it's not going to be looked at by a teacher, the notion of 15 minutes of free writing can be a little intimidating. So I was just curious if there's space for another way of expressing one's ideas in that moment.
Do you think it would be good to have students write it in their first language? I mean, after all, it's an expressive writing, and I mean, brainstorming should be intuitive and creative. I mean, we could offer the Inuit students in this case that they can write it in Inuktitut. It doesn't matter, and if it's just about ideas.
That's an interesting option, sort of a plurilingual pedagogy in that case, drawing for that part of it. Yeah, I think there's lots of potential there to think about that and other ways of expressing it, just to get those ideas out and in some way recorded. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating, and I really I'll echo Sunny's comment, because I was curious as you were presenting the initial 6 categories of the model, what that looked like for the Inuit students you work with, and voila, you brought it. So that was really nice to see and interesting to learn about, because it's so fundamental to a worldview that's important to acknowledge and to think about as they move between worlds.
Yes, well, I wanted to test it really because the Ryan Niemiec, if you read his articles, I mean, these 24 strengths is not just his idea. I mean, these are, amongst psychologists who deal with positive psychology, Martin Seligman and the founders of positive psychology, they are considered, they even call it a common language. Very interesting, isn't it? Common language of inherent character strengths. And so that has been very interesting to me to actually test, just how common is common, I mean, how universal is that? People really, really, and of course they can, if you look at the tiles and the values in the table with, I mean, I know it's the translations are probably very approximated, I could imagine, but still there's harmony in there, and there are things that we can empathize with, of course we can, but I'm thinking that grouping, as you say, that clustering is possibly a cultural anchoring which maybe doesn't resonate so much with other cultures. So that was one aspect of when I started using this in the classroom, of going, okay, let's test it, let's see, maybe people are irritated by the idea of let's think hope next to creativity, for example. I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Welcome.
It looks like we have about 5 minutes remaining. Is there anyone else who wants to get in a final question? Just
well,
busy thinking of those long words that we're trying to I still have those long words in my head that were so fascinating.
I actually have another question. It's a little thorny, and I kind of hesitated to pose
Go
it.
for it.
But
I like thorny questions.
and maybe during your testing it came up, I don't know, but it's this notion that when we, have a good alignment between our values and our characteristics, success is likely to be there. And coming out of a view of as kind of a critical educator who looks a lot at systemic racism and other larger social structures that really can limit our life options, regardless of how well it seems we align our values and our characteristics. I'm just curious if the students ever express a sense of that, of the kinds of challenges, because there are very particular challenges that young people are up against in the north of Canada. And yeah, I guess that's my question. The larger, outside of myself, outside of my values and characteristics, that larger social context.
Well, it's always been a very successful writing project with my help. It's always been a very successful essay topic for, precisely what you say, the sort of determinist idea. Well, I can try as hard as I like, but if the system's rigged against me, then, I'm not going to graduate from Harvard. I don't. That's a flippant example, but I mean, it needn't be something like that. I mean, we know, don't we? We know that we do have, in many contexts, systemic obstacles. We'll call them obstacles. So, yeah, I think that, and then, okay, but then I always have a choice. I always have a choice, and my strengths continue to be my strengths, and perhaps I have to, be a little bit trickier in orientating myself. What are the goals that I orientate myself towards? That too is something that is, maybe brainwashing. Maybe those goals represent values that are not actually mine. They're the received wisdom about what it is to be successful in life, and something, well, maybe I'm going to define my life successes differently. So I've had a lot of very very interesting perspectives with many students, even people with not very much language. They really have taken the time to try and express to me how they feel about just that kind of thorny issue. Yeah, what is it? It's not really a thorny issue. It's that complexity, isn't it? Complexity of decision making. Yeah.
Are you still publishing on that topic, or are you predominantly sort of in a pedagogical practice mode these days?
Yes, I'd love to publish again, but I think if I was going to go back into writing, that I would want to have a co-author, and in order to produce that intercultural perspective that I think is, going back to psychology, is worthwhile. Is worthwhile. I have nothing against psychologists and psychology at all. On the contrary, I'm very enthusiastic and passionate about what particularly positive psychology has to say. But I do think there is a component where we can have that discourse about, differentiating certainly what we do in education, but in other aspects of society, according to the multiple cultural identities that we have. I think sometimes it's good for psychologists to be reminded that, there are those perspectives, and maybe that common language is common but not universal.
Thanks so much. What a maybe great note to end on.
Welcome.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We are at time, perfectly on time. So
Oh, that's good. I'm sorry.
amazing. I want to thank you so much for your presentation and for sharing with us today. And I want to, yes, applause again.
Thank you so much.
I'd like, go ahead, sorry.
Yes, anytime. And I'm very happy for you to contact me at the end of the slides. Is my email address here at Kativik Ilisarniliriniq. My goodness, it's getting late in the afternoon. And so if you would like to ask me any questions, or perhaps you have tomorrow or the next day an idea that you'd like to share with me, then I'm really happy to hear, or if there's any other way that I can support students with something that they're writing. I'm very happy if you contact me. Perhaps I know something. Can't guarantee, but maybe I do.
Well, thank you so much for that generous offer.
Thank you so much, Joanna.
I'd just like to thank everyone who came and participated. So thank you. Just a reminder that the webinars take place on the first Tuesday of every month, and you can keep it on your calendar. And you can always find more